This is part 3 of my 3-part devlog updates. So my first video was all about procedural generation, the changes I'd made to marching cubes and the like. My second video was about the player and ship controllers and how I had to update them to work on the non-spherical worlds that I was now procedurally generating. And this video is going to be more of a broad look at the solar system. Okay. So, the first thing I should talk about is this is actually something I've had in since like day one, but I have a lovely orbit display system. So it shows the path each planet takes uh, when I actually boot up the game, right? And as I change variables like the initial velocity of the planet, see if a planet doesn't have any velocity, right, it'll just zoom straight towards the sun. But I want to start out with some forward velocity, so I get pulled back into orbit. Change like the radius of the planet. You can see how that messes with the orbit of the moon a lot. The surface gravity of the planet too. And this code for the orbit display is straight off of Sebastian Legg's YouTube channel. He does great stuff. I love his content. His coding adventures are a pleasure to watch. Um, it's kind of mythbustery. I don't know. I just love stuff that gets you excited about science, and he's got great stuff on there. I totally would recommend him. But he's worked a lot with procedural generation. I've looked at a bunch of his procedural generation stuff, and he's also worked a lot with planets. Ooh. Um, so I've been referencing a lot of his stuff throughout this project, but this code specifically is just like all him. And he was actually inspired a lot by Outer Wilds, which I played over winter break, and was a big inspiration for this project. So I guess a little trickle down inspiration there. Anyway, so that's the orbit display. I've been messing a lot with the spacing of my planets. So right here, my sun is at position 0 on the X, and Greeny, which is like Earth, right, is 1,300 meters away, 13 kilometers. But it's actually really 10 kilometers away because the sun has a radius of 3,000 units, right? 3,000 meters. So there's actually a 10,000 gap between the surface of the sun and the center of Greeny. So Greeny is technically, like, if you factor in Greeny's radius, 175 less than 10 kilometers, but you get the point, right? And in my earlier builds of the solar system, I had my planets much farther apart. So here I can switch over to like this version. See a massive difference. This planet was 2,500 units away. I also had, let's see, in this system here, this one I thought was not too bad. Um, my player was 7,000 units away. But I like look at all these files I have. Like I've been messing a lot with the scale of the planets, which is an interesting challenge because when you're thinking about coding a physics simulation of a solar system, your first thoughts are, oh man, that physics programming is gonna be hard or whatever. But actually, the physics programming I would say was the easier part. I think the harder part of this whole thing is setting up all of the planets to actually work together, all next to each other. Because like I want the solar system to feel good. I want these planets to not be too far apart, not too close together, because in other builds of the game, my planets were so far apart that players would spend like a minute, well, not a minute, like 30, 45 seconds zooming to another planet. And when you're in space, it's just you're constantly applying a forward acceleration. There's nothing holding you back. I don't have any friction. So what players would do is they'd spend like 45 seconds zooming towards the planet, right? They would be at max speed. They would miss the planet because your acceleration's all messed up, right? And then they have to spend 45 seconds hitting 0 as they're turning back around. And now they've traveled all this way, so they're farther away from the planet than when they started, just on the other side. And then they zoom back to the planet, and the same thing happens again, and the problem is even more exasperated, or exacerbated, or whatever, because the player started from a farther distance away. So they're just like ping-ponging back and forth, missing the planet over and over again. Here's my reference planet. Over and over and over again, right? And so some of my playtesters didn't even make it to some of the planets, and I'm just like, oh, okay. So I messed a lot with the scaling of things, and I will continue to do so. Okay, and right now all my planets are spheres, but don't worry. I click the magical play button, and ooh, there we go. We've got a lovely sun and some planets too. So, my sun is definitely probably the thing that is catching your eye. It's actually just some particle emitters. So here I can turn off the particles around a red glowing sphere. It has an emission property on it, right? And this works surprisingly well. Here I can show you if I turn off the sphere. It just looks weird and hollow. And I was following some like YouTube tutorial on it. I can link it in the description. From like 2009, I think. And I was shocked at how good the results were considering how old the tutorial was. And I might actually have to tone it down a little bit too because I'm not an artist, so I don't really have what do you say, a solid art direction in this project. But I think the sun might look a little too good for how the texturing is on my planets. But that's another problem. Speaking of problems, when I first implemented all of my mesh generators into my scene, I was really excited to see them like move around and all this stuff. But as soon as I threw all these mesh generators in, Unity just exploded. It was funny because I was like, "What? Like nothing's working." I was getting errors and errors and blah 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 and blah. And the reason was because all of my chunks, well, they're not spheres no more. In fact, they're rather complicated meshes because I'm using the actual mesh as the collider. So this chunk right here, well, Unity's default rigid body systems don't use non-convex colliders. So a convex collider would be like this sphere, right? This is a gift from my sister, by the way. Thank you, Courtney. Whereas something like, I don't know, this cup is a non-convex collider. So when Unity is making the collider for this cup, they're going to put the mesh over the top. So like if I were to collide with this cup, I would stop right here at the rim. I couldn't put my whole hand through. And I keep saying Unity this, Unity that, whatever, blah, blah, blah. What I really mean is non-kinematic rigid bodies prevent this from happening. And rigid bodies is how Unity works with physics, right? So what did I have to do? Well, in my earlier versions of Planet Hopper that were using spheres, I was using non-kinematic rigid bodies, which basically means that they're affected by physics. Okay, I know there's some double negatives in here, so bear with me. But basically, uh, a non-kinematic rigid body uh, has forces applied to it. So I would calculate the acceleration due to gravity in the system, and then I would apply that force to the body, and I would just like say, "Hey, rigid body, add force," and it would just work, right? But I can't do that anymore because of this collider limitation. So essentially, what I had to do was I had to switch to now I'm using a kinematic rigid body, which means I just have to handle the calculations myself. At first, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to like write my own rigid body. Like this is crazy. Like but it actually wasn't that bad. I just have to store some stuff myself and then just update the position of the rigid body manually. But it works fine. So yeah, that was a bit of a scare, but it wasn't too bad to fix. And then let's see what else. Oh, I also had to take out the planet rotations. So like you'll notice like the first few videos on this channel, or I guess in the Planet Hopper playlist, are all about rotating the planets and figuring out the math for that. And unfortunately, I had to take that out. Just temporary though. I'm planning on putting it back in soon. I think it should work. Hopefully, with all the changes I've made. I might have to put in some elbow grease. But I took it out when I was messing around with all this rigid body stuff because Unity was just so angry. I had to appease the Unity gods. Um, but yeah, so I guess if I go back into the game, I still have my chunk floating. Um, you can see I can just fly around a little bit. Things are working pretty well. I'm really happy with how things are going. You'll notice like my green planet is way more complicated than my moon. My moon is literally just like a few layers of noise on top, which is, it's temporary. I want to figure out some cool stuff I can do. I spent a lot of time setting up that grid modifier system so that I can have more interesting planets. Like I want to dig up some trenches or something in the moon, I think. Make it look like the Death Star, like with the trench around the equator. I think it's around the equator. I don't know. That's what I'll probably do. But yeah, also I have the orange runt over here. I don't know if I'll be able to get over there in a reasonable time. Yeah, it's interesting. Like the scale of everything is an interesting problem to solve. And looking at Outer Wilds, they have an autopilot system where you can just like autopilot to a planet. It really helps because it teaches players how to actually fly around, by example. And so they know that they can't just hold W and accelerate because if you keep accelerating and you don't actually like decelerate yourself, you'll just zoom right past the planet or crash right into it. In my case, if you crash into a planet, it's not that big of a deal. You just bounce off of it a little bit. But in Outer Wilds, your ship just explodes. I'm not planning on implementing that, but it would be fun. Speaking of exploding ships, right now the sun is just a lovely light. It doesn't really do anything. So if I were to land on the sun, that's right, on the sun, the particles make way. And woohoo! I landed on the sun. Never been done before. I should probably make it kill you at some point, but just haven't gotten around to it. So yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. It's been really fun combining all the procedural stuff into this solar system. I think really what I need to focus on is those additional grid modifiers, getting the planets in there. But yeah, I think that's about it. So uh, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out.